well, you know what? If somebody can take an idea you share with them in 5 minutes over beer and build a better company than you, then shame on you, they out-executed you.
Today, we're excited to welcome Varun Badhwar, a 3-time founder in cybersecurity, the builder of Prisma Cloud at Palo Alto Networks, to $300 million ARR in just 3 years, and the founder of Redlock, which was acquired for $230 million. With nearly 2 decades in the field, Varun has founded multiple companies, including CypherCloud, led platform security at Salesforce, and started his career advising Fortune 500 clients at KPMG. He currently serves as the founder and CEO of Endor Labs, where he's focused on securing the software supply chain. Along the way, he's been deeply involved in shaping how enterprises approach cloud native and next generation security. In this episode, we explore his journey as a repeat founder, lessons learned from building and selling companies, and what it takes to create generational businesses in today's AI-driven world.
Yeah, I mean, especially with what we're seeing with some of the interesting hiring strategies coming out of Facebook, it's as if recruiters are now more like sports agents. Do you see that being sustainable?
There's a lot of things that I don't see sustainable at the moment within the madness, if I will call it. Yes, it is changing the world around us. Yes, it's going to have long-lasting impacts on technology and every other sector on the planet. I just think the markets are very irrational right now.
I want to start off by asking you a question that I think is close to home with you. You've been on both sides of M&A. What's the biggest lessons from those experiences shape how you build and scale companies today?
Fundamentally, and actually I recently wrote about this somewhere, I get a lot of people coming and asking me, well, you know, I really want to kind of build to get acquired. And I want to get acquired in the next 2 years. That's my target. What can I do? And I just think that's a wrong mindset. There are so many things outside of your control that you simply cannot build to get acquired. What you should build for is build to be great. Try to build the greatest company ever in a category, whatever category you're in. You know, can you be the leader or at least the top 2, top 3? Can you build a brand that people resonate with that is a net positive brand in whatever industry you're in? And can you build an operationally efficient and rapidly scaling organization? Because then you're building for the long haul. And along the way, what happens, great, you get options on the table. If there's an acquirer that is interested in you, you'll also be able to kind of acquire and negotiate the deal on your own terms because you'll be in a position of strength. And so fundamentally, when I think about that question, I just say build a great company and don't take shortcuts. Because the other piece is, when you're trying to build to sell mindset, you're taking shortcuts all over the place. You're not building to scale your product. You're not building your go-to-market to scale. You're not thinking about the key investments you need to make from your brand for the next 3 to 5 years. And I think that just leads to a bad outcome. I've seen too many companies that say, well, I think I want to get acquired now. And then it's not happening in your terms. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to be unhappy with the outcome.
That's interesting. I find that in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of ideas floating around, right? And you hear the phrase, ideas are cheap. It's all about the execution. Are you suggesting that when it comes to building a company, the focus shouldn't be on getting rich? It should be on focusing on your customers, building a great product, and ultimately the successes that come with it becomes a byproduct.
Exactly. I think getting rich is an outcome. It's not kind of what you're driving towards. If you wake up and say, I'm building this to get rich, you may never get rich and you're going to be grossly disappointed. If you wake up every morning just feeling that customer problem that you really want to solve, thinking about the best company on the planet you want to build, the best culture you want to create, hiring the best employees you could possibly find, getting the best investors and board members along the way, I think the outcome is just radically different. And guess what? You're going to have better likelihood of getting rich with that mindset, in my opinion.
Why do you think having that mindset, having that focus of getting rich distracts the founder and their team from achieving the end goal?
I don't know if I have the perfect answer, at least from my perspective. I read this about a founder who sold a company, got rich, was alone, depressed in his life, didn't know what to do, and essentially said money's pointless. I honestly think money's good. We all need money. Don't get me wrong. I like driving nice cars, living in a nice home, sending my kids to private school. But that's not the sole objective, what I wake up getting excited about and go to bed excited about. I just think mentally it's an unhealthy state of mind to be in. Whereas when you think about greatness being a function of, you created a legacy of a company, you created a legacy of a product that changed the way the industry operates. I think you're just more inner happiness comes more naturally. I think you're optimizing for the right things at that point. But don't get me wrong, like we live in Silicon Valley. This is about the Silicon Mine. You can't buy a house less than $5 million in the peninsula around Palo Alto these days. So you need the money, but that's just not the sole objective I would focus on.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think ultimately we are in a very exciting space, especially right now with AI. I want to come back to that point later on this episode, how things have changed and how do you think about building companies in this new evolution. But to start off with, as far as M&A is concerned, you've been on both sides, as I said earlier on. And I guess you could take a lot of lessons from that, being on the side of being acquired and being on the side of acquiring. When you look at the two different C's, how do they differ?
I think it also depends on the situation. Like I said, the question is who's in the position of strength? If you're a startup founder and you've got 9 months of runway before you run out of money, guess what? You're not in a position of strength and leverage. And, the acquirer is going to have an upper hand on any part of the conversation, the deal, the terms, the negotiation, and stuff like that. I also actually say step back and ask the question, why do you want to get acquired? Now, there's the money part of it, but ultimately, does it accelerate your vision of whatever you're going to create? So I'll give you an example. So with Redlock, we were not in the market to get acquired in 2018 when Palo Alto Networks came around and Nikesh had just become CEO and, was very interested in accelerating cloud. The first part of our conversations were not about how much will you pay to buy my company and what do you think it's worth? It was around what do you want to do with this? What is your vision as the acquirer? And eventually, if you think about it, 9 out of 10 companies that get acquired die within the next 2 to 3 years. Like they just don't make progress. And part of that is typically the acquirers will go hire, buy a company with 100, 200, 300 employees. 25 people in engineering go and become part of a 10,000 person engineering organization. 5 people in marketing go become part of a 1,000 person marketing function. And you just lose the spirit of what you've created. So the question for me, the right question, in my opinion, as a founder or CEO considering an acquisition is, well, what happens post-acquisition? What are my odds of success? Can I actually scale faster than I ever could have? And I think in a lot of those conversations, indication I had, it was the right structure, which is they let Redlock be an entity of its own. We rebranded to Prisma Cloud, but I ran the entire unit as a GM of the business. We had our own sales team, our own marketing team, our own finance team. We kind of set a lot of our strategy and goals, obviously in consultation with the mothership, but we had essentially it was like having a VC that was giving me a blank check and giving me a bigger brand and the umbrella of which I could go build a bigger business. And so to me, I think those are the classes of conversation and types of conversation you being on the side of getting acquired need to have. But frankly, I think turning that around, I think the acquirers need to answer the question of what are we going to do to increase the likelihood of this working, because the odds are against you. The industry statistics are against you. Very rarely do acquisitions work out well. And so thinking kind of about how are you going to retain the spirit and the function of that? And actually, I think Nikesh used to do a really good job where he would say, if we're acquiring a company, it means that they have out-executed us on whatever we would probably want to do in that space. That's why we're buying, not building. And in that case, that team, that executive team, that CEO, the founders have won. And they're probably smarter than us in that category. So why would I have them come work under somebody else that couldn't figure out that for us internally? And so, the structure there would be the CEOs would come and lead their functions and their businesses as mini business units. And we would try to keep the entirety of these companies together for as long as we could until we've hit some critical mass and scale. So yeah, I think a lot of thinking needs to go into how are you going to set up the company for success? Because even if you're getting bought, you don't want to be out there just, yes, you become rich, but you're getting bored out of your mind and you want to really continue to build something meaningful.
It's interesting. I mean, I think about companies and their goals. Everybody aspires to be a legacy company. You build a startup and you want to eventually become publicly traded. Acquisition is another route. Just to unpack that slightly, before we think about some of the misconceptions that perhaps founders think about when building companies for an acquisition, why do companies acquire other companies? What are the sort of the key reasons? Is it competition, to buy out the competition? Is it talent? Is it IP? And is it sometimes just to dismantle a business?
I hope there's not a lot of deals where people are buying companies to dismantle a business. It does happen rarely, but it happens in a lot of legacy markets. I would say the typical scenario, at least pre-AI, and then we'll talk about the AI impact. The typical scenario is there is an area of investment. There's an emerging area where, the legacy company that is the acquirer has not moved fast enough or has not prioritized that until now. And at this point, there is already a team or a few teams out there that have already made enough progress in the market to show product market fit, to show like there is something here worthy of investment and scale. And the larger acquiring company generally believes there's a large enough market for them to get involved in and scale up. Typically, they feel like the catch-up piece of trying to build it themselves, they either don't have the talent, nor will they have the focus and DNA of tackling something like this fast enough, right? So going back to Palo Alto Networks, until Nikesh came around, it was mostly a firewall and network security company. The cloud security buyers are different. The product architecture is different. The sales process is different. And so, that's just an entirely different product engineering go-to-market muscle you need. And so an acquisition of something like Redlock made a lot of sense. I'll take an example of another company that we acquired along the way. It was the last acquisition I made when I was in Palo Alto Networks, was a company called Bridge Crew. Our thesis was, as security shifts more and more left, you need to get closer to the developer. You really need a kind of open source or PLG strategy to get into the hearts and minds of that group or cohort of people that are now have a seat at the table. And so there was a company called Bridge Crew that had built a great open source product called Chekhov, and I believed fundamentally would help us at Palo Alto Networks, a very tops-down enterprise company, now have the ability to go build that community of cloud security professionals and cloud and DevOps professionals and really integrate that and kind of come in bottoms up from that community while you're coming top down with our Palo Alto enterprise sales muscle. That was a good reason for us to enter a new market, a new persona that frankly we would have taken a lot longer to figure out ourselves. So that typically is the thing I see the most. With AI though, you are obviously seeing a lot of talent-centric acquisitions at insane valuations, frankly. And I think now we just live in a different world, and we're seeing that to become a much more common pattern. Previously, a talent acquisition was generally a failing startup that doesn't have product market fit or is way earlier, typically running out of money, good people, 5, 7, 10, 20 people that can do something for you. But now you're starting to see strategic multiples for talent acquisition. So, we live in a different world now.
Yeah, I mean, especially with what we're seeing with some of the interesting hiring strategies coming out of Facebook, it's as if recruiters are now more like sports agents, right? The engineers are getting multi-million-dollar deals. Do you see that being sustainable?
I do not. There's a lot of things that I don't see sustainable at the moment within the AI madness, if I will call it. Look, first and foremost, the bearing is, yes, it is changing the world around us. Yes, it's going to have long-lasting impacts on technology and every other sector on the planet. I just think the markets are very irrational right now, right? I mean, whether you look at some of the companies in AI that are having to raise at least $1 billion, $2 billion a year, because that's how much cash they're burning to go get 200, 300 million in ARR every year. So that equation is not long-lasting. The compensation packages are not sustainable. The big unanswered question, actually, I was reading just yesterday an article about the infighting, the cultural infighting that has began at Meta between, somebody who's come in for heading AI for OpenAI, and then there's a Scale AI founder coming in. And then there are the people at Meta that have been looked upon and worshipped for the last decade as the core researchers in AI. And now you're going to have to figure out how to make all of these people come together in a room and work together. So it's still like the jury remains open to going to see if this is ever going to work out. I think there's just a lot of uncertainty around which of these business models will ultimately be sustainable and which ones will be transient. And then, of course, from a startup perspective, there's the threat of, look, the foundational model companies were building models, and there was hundreds and thousands of startups that were essentially building wrappers on ChatGPT and Claude and, calling them companies and raising at insane valuations. But clearly, as these foundational companies move up the stack, OpenAI now has a CEO for apps. Guess what they're going to be doing? They're going to be looking at vertical apps for healthcare and legal and software development and customer support because that they have to move up the value chain. It's going to be very interesting to see how many startups keep getting killed. And we already see this, right? With every new release of a model, there's usually dozens of startups that fall to the side of the street.
It's scary. I mean, being a CEO of a company, it's obviously a money grab at the moment. It has been over the last, I guess, year or so. You look at the product, look at the demo, and you realize this is just ChatGPT with a white label. Let's go back to the M&A piece. What are the common misconceptions founders have about M&A?
Lots. I'm trying to figure out what are the couple that we want to focus on. I mean, one is just like you can't plan it. I think we've kind of belabored that point. I won't go through much of that. I think the second is, at least on the founder side and the startup side, you overestimate the likelihood of these working out because, like I said, 9 times out of 10, most acquisitions will fail for cultural clash, organizational structure not being there, just DNAs of companies being fundamental mismatches. So that tends to be a common thing. I think the third thing people wrap around a lot, and I think this is becoming more common now, is just the structure of the deals. More and more companies are making sure that the acquired teams are staying longer, right? What typically used to be a 1-year retention is now used to then become a 2-year retention. Now, most commonly, I'm seeing 3 to 4 year retention expectations. A lot of times this misconception of, well, I'm going to sell my company and I'm a free agent. It's longer before you're a free agent. Part of what those companies are doing is typically we're seeing more and more revest expectations. So it's not just, hey, you'll stay here because I'm going to give you retention, but because a lot of the acquisitions are happening sooner and time frames are getting compressed, like maybe a startup's been around 3 years and, now the founders are 75% vested. How do I kind of keep them in the seat? I think we're seeing more common patterns of, well, you're going to take 50% of your vested equity and revest it as well. So I think, you're not done till you're done. Now, granted, the question becomes, well, am I working as hard? Am I staying up at night as much? I think the challenges become different. I certainly, for the 3 years and 1 day that I was at Palo Alto Networks post-acquisition, I just worked differently. I didn't work less. I think people around me, my family, my wife were surprised that I wasn't working less because I was excited about the joint vision. Like I said, if it's done well, you should be scaling your business even faster, which means you're still working harder. Yes, you're spending a lot of times on big room strategy and planning. That was a frustration. And I think that is a common pattern for anywhere you go post-acquisition. But yeah, like this notion of, hey, I'm going to be checked out after I get acquired. That's usually a sign of a failed acquisition if you as a founding team member are able to do that. Most cases, you should be working just as hard after the acquisition, especially if you have a high integrity and highly ethical person as an individual.
I'm curious, what are your thoughts of the founders that get acquired and have, as you said, continue with the journey versus the ones that take their company public? Is it easier to maintain that momentum as a public company CEO? Now, obviously, you have way more. There's responsibilities either way, but now the public are looking at what the market is saying versus the CEO who gets acquired. Is it quite similar in your opinion? Do you think you're more likely to be more motivated as an acquired company versus one that goes public?
No, I think, look, the reality of most leadership teams that get acquired, there's an expiration date. They already have a plan of, hey, by this time, I'll usually be out of here and I'll be planning my next thing. There's a common fallacy and misconception, though. I think people think like startups in the seed stage and Series A are the hardest, and then things get easier as you get capital and more people. I would argue that company building gets harder as you scale, right? When you're trying to get $1 million in ARR, and then you have to go get 10 million in ARR, then you got to go get 50 million in ARR. The stakes get higher and higher. But to the point, like when you become a public company, as a private company, you can miss a couple of quarters and, your board might frown at you and you'll make some leadership changes. You can't be missing quarters as a public company. The consequences of that are extremely high. So the accuracy, the maturity of how you run a business, the regulatory pressures, the SEC requirements, by that point, you're obviously selling globally to customers who've got global mandates. It certainly gets harder. So I think there's a lot of respect that I have for founders, especially that have taken their companies public all the way as CEOs. You see oftentimes that there'll be a change in leadership and a new CEO will come in. So kudos, like I have a mad respect for, as an example, Bipul Sinha at Rubrik, who's just an incredible mentor to me, CEO, leader. And yeah, I think it's very rare and I aspire to be that someday.
I know we don't want to talk about money, right? Because it's a byproduct, but I'm just curious. And I'm sure listeners are keen to hear this. From a financial standpoint, when you do get acquired, what does that timeline look like? If you have to stay in the company for 2 years or 3 years and that time is extending, how does the payout period look like?
It's rare things are typical, but generally speaking, again, depends how early the company is, how late the company is, but generally speaking, there's some sort of at least, again, I'm talking about the CEOs and the founding teams and executives, maybe to begin with, and then we could talk about employees and engineers, because I think there's a really important part there we need to touch on, especially with mishaps that have happened with AI companies of late that have really let employees down. But fundamentally, and hopefully the same kind of structure is negotiated for employees as it is for leaders. But usually based on what you're vested, you're paid some or all of that upfront, whether it's in cash or in equity. And then you'll have a combination of your unvested equity or revested equity that'll continue to vest and turn into either cash or stock of the new company based on whatever the deal dynamics are. And then typically there's a retention pool, which is negotiated in, which is above and beyond the price per share that your startup was acquired at, but are incentives for people typically paid, if you're a public company acquiring, typically paid as RSUs in a typical employment agreement. So there's a purchase agreement, and then you will sign employment agreements with the new employer. And generally, there is an element of a premium on the retention above and beyond what it would be if you just hired that person as an employee of the company. So you kind of make money off those two segments. Now, a lot of cases where the acquisition wasn't a great outcome for the company, maybe the stock is worth zero. The hope is that at least your retention packages as part of your employment agreements will have some premium compared to you just joining that company as an employee.
And I'm guessing the retention period and the earnout following the acquisition isn't just tied to time spent. These aren't just golden handcuffs. They are tied to performance.
It's again a question of leverage and who has the upper hand. And my recommendation to founders and CEOs is if you are in a position of strength, you should never negotiate any performance-based milestones, and I'll tell you why. There's a good reason for that, but you should kind of focus on time-based. And the reason for that is I have no idea what I'm walking into. The company, the politics, the organizational dynamics, the sales team's ability to sell my product if I have sales targets, unless I am kind of running this as an independent company. At which point, if I have full control, then I'm much more willing and able to sign up for performance-based earnouts, because then it's like a bonus plan for me and I control everything running my business. But if my business is going to get disintegrated, some people go here, some people go report to somebody else and work for somebody else in sales and marketing and customer success and finance, then I've lost control of the ship. And then you're asking me to steer and make some significant inroads, that becomes a problem to me. And again, if you're in a position of leverage and strength, you'll typically kind of work yourself around that.
One last question I want to ask you about M&As. Now, you've been through successful M&As, but there also have been some acquisitions out there in the market that unfortunately aren't so successful. They are acquisitions because the company isn't performing, but they may be buying the IP or it's an acqui-hire. With those sort of situations, we don't need to name any specific companies. As far as those outcomes are concerned, what do you tend to see being the driving factors for the acquirer to be interested? Is it more leaning towards the IP? Is it the talent?
It's mostly talent. Maybe a little bit of IP, because the way I put it is, look, if the company's failed, chances are either that product didn't work or was in the wrong place, wrong time. Otherwise, there's probably other foundational issues. And so generally it is, if I was to put a bucket, it's probably 80% people, 20% IP. That reminds me, I said I would come back to talk about what happens to the ICs and the engineers in the company when these acquisitions happen. And I want to touch on that because we've seen some really terrible situations come down off late. A company like Windsurf gets acquired by Google, like the 10 people and the founders go make a windfall, and then you leave 150 people on the side of a road. And kind of what I'll say is, for the people that are the individuals jaded and wondering if they should ever go work at a startup, it's a shame. I'm sorry that happened to you. It should never happen. And I think it's a shame on the founding team not knowing the details, but it's a bit like the army mentality. No man or no person left behind is my mindset. So in fact, when I look back at the Redlock exit, until this date, I get messages from employees, ICs in the company that said, hey, we've got this vacation home we bought at Jersey Shore that was only possible because of the acquisition and what you did for us. And please come use it with your family anytime. Or somebody will share some other stories and get pictures of cars they bought that they could only because of this. I just say this to the founders listening. It's probably not your last foray foray into building companies. Like, chances are if you built once, you got the bug, you're going to want to go back and build again. Reputation matters a lot in Silicon Valley. People remember kind of what happened in the past. It's not easily forgotten. And more importantly, like, listen, these are the people that have helped you create the foundation of what allowed you and enabled you to go get a deal done. And leaving them on the side is just purely unethical and wrong, in my opinion. And I just want people to know that that is a very rare situation. And there are more founders that I know that are certainly watching for the backs of their employees and making sure whether it's giving them the right equity packages, giving them the right refreshers as part of strong performance management processes, to giving liquidity as you run a company and build it for a longer time and you're not quickly getting acquired, having liquidity options for employees. Because look, the reality is when people join startups, they're not getting the highest cash compensation packages out there, and people have obligations to their families and commitments to just their lifestyle. So making sure if somebody's there for you 3-4 years and beyond, how are you giving some liquidity options to your employees along the way is super important, in my opinion.
I think this comes down to integrity. I mean, I think Warren Buffett says it's energy, intelligence, and integrity. But if you don't have the last, you have a dangerous person, right? So I think it really comes down to integrity. This is great, Varun. It's an interesting topic because it's not one that's come up on the show as of late. And I'm excited to see the reaction of as it goes out there and how people respond to this particular topic. The next piece I wanted to talk to you about is building in new markets versus disrupting existing. This is a new era that we're in, and you're absolutely right. This is staying. This is a change in the market. AI is going to have an impact. Part of me makes me feel that this is more around, are we thinking about displacing existing more than we're thinking about creating new things that don't even exist yet?
Look, I think there's an opportunity for both, and they're frankly different, and especially with AI. Every single app, every single use case will be replaced with a new way of doing it. Whether you're CRM, whether you're an email company, whether you're a productivity company, whether you're a content company, look at SEO, right? I mean, how much of our search windows on browsers is now consumed by kind of the AI recommendation? Every use case is going to get disrupted and rebuilt AI native. So that is going to happen, which means where traditionally you would really want to be thoughtful about, am I entering a replacement market? There are mature companies. That means I have to build a lot more product before I can enter. Like if it's a new market, I could build one feature and enter the market. If I'm disrupting, I need to have everything already existing, and then I got to be 100, 200, 300% better. But I think those kind of rules are getting rewritten. And I frankly think they're just different, right? Existing categories, there's budget. If I spend on CRM, I spend on CRM every year. And if you can give me a CRM and convince me this is way better, you have a shot at just taking existing budget. In a new market, you're convincing me to go through a budgeting cycle and make money and convince my leadership and my CFO that we need to go make something happen. So those tend to be a little bit longer, smaller deals built over time. Coming back to the replacement market, existing mature markets, typically it's not just the product you're building, but it's the coexistence in a workflow, in the integration. It's an ecosystem, right? Like, is Salesforce the best CRM on the planet? Questionable, but what they certainly have is the best integration ecosystem. The reason I can't rip out Salesforce is because it's connected to every other system in my environment. And anybody that builds a new Salesforce has to then have that entire ecosystem in place for me to kind of run my end-to-end sales and marketing automation platform. I fundamentally think it's different, but I do believe with AI, you have a lot greater opportunity for more existing market displacements than you've ever had before.
It's a new era, right? And I think going back to the Salesforce example, I think they've done a great job of creating a sticky business, because you're sitting there thinking, this looks like a great product, but I'm going to have to do a lot of work changing this, right? You have to think about everything that's tied to your Salesforce platform. As far as displacing markets are concerned, without specifically selecting a category, when it comes to AI, what are the biggest problems that are currently being sought after as opportunities for venture capital, but also for founders?
Okay, so first we got to put aside consulting, because I feel like the most money is being made by consulting firms just going through use case by use case in an internal enterprise and figuring out ways to modernize and infuse AI. If you talk about it purely from a product category perspective, the two at the very top of my mind that are the here and now, because there's a lot of hypotheticals what AI could do, there's proof of concepts and demos, but the two that I think are production ready at this time are AI coding agents and kind of what I call the software revolution of how we build software. It's incredible to see Cursor go be almost $500 million in ARR already, and Lovable and Replit and lots of companies behind it also coming up. So there's that. The other use case is certainly around customer support, customer interaction, ticket deflection, just the help desk. So those two to me are kind of the here and now. And I know you said make it evergreen. I think it's impossible to make this podcast evergreen with just the pace of change and innovation and disruption happening. But let's just maybe double click on the first one of AI software and AI coding agents. There's 30, 40 million developers out there in the world. What if now with these agents, you can have 300 to 500 million people writing code? That's essentially what's happening. What we learned in 4 years in college as computer science undergrads, and then you learn at work, you can now learn in 1 hour using coding agents. Heck, you could probably argue you don't even need to learn it. There's pros and cons to this. You can have citizen developers. Everybody can write code. But I think what we're finding is, and especially because this ties in very closely to the business Endor Labs is in, these coding agents are good at like web apps, like building a website, a web front. It's, things of that nature. It's surely not great at building like good, strong back-end distributed systems. We talked about Salesforce. If somebody tried to build a new Salesforce and built it with cursor and vibe coding, it's not going to work. It's going to fall apart in 30 seconds. And so I think that's far away from kind of distributed systems. It's really bad at maintaining existing software, having all of that context and knowing how to do things there. And it's really bad at security. So 62% of lines of code produced by AI are insecure by default. And so you kind of go and think about this. Great, I could write 10 times more code, but now I'm going to introduce all these problems. It's a bit like saying there's completely new technology for cars, or it's like thinking about flying cars. Like, great, flying cars are here, but there's no infrastructure right now to make that a reality. And similarly, like there's new cars and like they're not going to work on the existing roads that we have. You're going to have to rebuild everything around it. So I think that's going to be part of the opportunity. I don't think software engineering is dead. I don't think developers go away and don't have jobs in the future. I think these technologies are co-pilots, not pilots, for a very good reason. And I think we're going to just shift in jobs. So now instead of building the cars, we're going to be building the roads and building the traffic lights and the infrastructure to keep these cars, these autonomous cars, safe on the road.
So your opinion is with platforms like Cursor, we're going to see more developers, not less.
I think that you are basically making the bar to start writing code just lower. My marketing team at Endor Labs is writing code as we speak.
So the access to entry, the bar to entry becomes lower. But it creates another, as you said, it creates other problems like security, like having your top engineers, you need them to have first principle thinking when they're looking at the architectural design of the code. But let's tap into security. I'd love to learn, I know you're a client, so I know what Endor does. I'd love for you to sort of give the listeners an idea of what problem is Endor Labs solving.
We started Endor Labs in 2021 because what we foundationally realized is software development isn't even software development anymore. If I could change the terminology, I would call it software assembly. Our developers write 10% of code, and 90% of the code they introduce into the applications is typically borrowed from the internet, copy-pasted, brought in from open source libraries. And it holds true more so now than ever before, because now 99% of the code is likely to be written by these agents. And they're not trained on like PhD level, go to computer science and learn how to write good code. All these agents were just trained on the code on the internet, meaning they learned the good, they learned the bad, they learned the ugly practices. They don't have a context of do this, don't do this because this is bad, insecure, not scalable. And so what we found in this transition from software development, where historically our developers used to write 80-90% of our code, to now software assembly, where all of these things are things that are components and dependencies and copy-pasted code and AI-generated code, is the risk of introducing security problems, quality problem, is higher than ever before. The velocity at which these are getting introduced and found is higher than ever before. And so if you run the old-fashioned kind of tools to scan for security problems in these environments, you end up with tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to potentially millions of issues being uncovered every year. If you have 100, 200, 500,000 developers that you have tasked with, and they're there in your company because they need to ship software fast, if you now burden them with 100,000 security findings, guess what's going to happen? Either they can't ship code and be innovative, or they ignore those problems and you ship insecure code. Both of those are non-ideal outcomes for any company, right? And so what Endor Labs does is solves that problem, which is it brings the best of scanning your code as it's being developed inside of your development IDs, inside of your AI coding assistant IDs, scanning with extreme precision. We have fundamentally rebuilt how code scanning works so that our average customer gets 92 to 95% fewer security alerts and findings related to their code. And then we don't just stop at give me the problem and let the developer figure out how to fix it. We actually help the developers automatically fix that code or work with their AI agents and auto remediate and self-heal that software. So the outcome a customer of Endor gets is where typically security was this large tax, often ignored, causing tension with security and engineering teams, now becomes a delightful, transparent experience in your secure software development lifecycle where stuff is just auto-magically getting built securely by default. That's what we do. And so our customers span from Cursor to, Robinhood, Peloton, OpenAI, Atlassian, Snowflake. So some of the most monumental companies that are building the software of today and tomorrow are customers. But then also large banks, large financial institutions, because everybody is a software company these days. If the backbone of your tech product or company is technology, whether you're an airline, whether you're a car rental company, if you have software that is underpinning of your revenue, then you need a product like Endor Labs.
When did you start the company, Varun?
2021 September.
So this is before ChatGPT.
Well before ChatGPT, but the thing, and I know where you're kind of heading with this, is like what happens to your company now.
My thinking is you've just created a much bigger solution post ChatGPT. Your product solves a much bigger problem now, especially with, as you said, platforms like Cursor. And I don't know if this was intentional or you somehow had a plan, but it seems like the stars aligned.
I always say building a startup and being successful with a startup takes grit and hard work. So don't take that away from you. But it does take a bit of timing and a bit of luck, and then a lot of execution and strategy. We started in September 2021. We had this thesis that open source software is going to be a pivotal place where security risks will emerge. 3 months later, Log4j became one of the biggest widely talked about incidents in software, which kind of just reinforced this problem we were talking about when code is untrusted, written by third parties that you have no contracts, no SLAs with. And then kind of this whole thesis that software development is software assembly is now true in spades with AI coding assistants that are all trained on that same open source software that has its problems. Yes, so to your point, we had a great business that we anticipated in 2021, but the opportunity is bigger than ever now at the volume and the velocity and the number of people that are producing code.
That's the point I was trying to get to, because the reason I asked you about the timing is just you're solving a really big problem now more than ever. Because as you said, there's more people that are going to start writing code, your marketing team, but maybe even people coming out of school very early on before thinking about going to university.
Typically, the way I explain to customers how to think about coding agents and just software agents is if you have 10,000 developers, you now added 10,000 interns in your organization overnight. What do interns need? Strong oversight. But when you have that many interns, who has the time and the cycles to actually provide strong oversight? And I think that is the fundamental threat in the software development era with AI and agents. And that's kind of where I said we need to rebuild the roads, rebuild the infrastructure, rebuild the security guardrails for this modern environment.
Going back to my first topic with you, the first topic we discussed, which was the M&A. You've done the M&A on both sides. Something tells me, is this going to be the same play this time, or are you thinking an IPO?
I will kind of remind you of my original thesis, which is I've never believed that you want to start a company with a plan of selling it. I didn't have that plan with Redlog. I certainly don't. I think I have learned so much more since then on how to build a much more scalable business. We took Prisma Cloud post-acquisition at Palo Alto Networks from during my time, 0 to 300 million ARR in 3 years. So I have seen hyperscale. I have been part of it. At this point, there's a massive opportunity for the reasons we just discussed here. And, I want to build Endor to be just a generational company that is a category leader in secure software development. And that's what we're building. That's what we're focused on.
Trust me, I wasn't asking because of the financial piece. It was more about the generational piece, building something, being a much larger company that has generational impact, which I feel like there's a real big opportunity here. The TAM is bigger, the risks are bigger in the market. and you can solve them. What are the biggest lessons you've learned as a leader, as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as a manager of people? If you were to sit with a founder today who is starting their first company and they've got an incredible idea, they have term sheets and they're ready to go, and they've asked you to advise them, what are the biggest lessons you can give them?
I think the first thing is a very personal thing, but making sure your family's on board with your decision to go build a startup. I mean, look, it's one of the biggest compromises you will make in your life and your family's life, right? Time commitments. You never switch off in my mind. And yes, we can talk about, yes, I do take time off and I do, try to drop off my kids to school every morning that I can. I have Saturdays dedicated to family time, no work. But in the back of your mind, subconsciously, you're always thinking about work. And the people that are very close to you know it and see through that. You can't BS your way through it. So what is your family or your significant others, your partners, your kids, whatever it is, whoever you truly care about are very close to you, are they prepared for, and have you had explicit conversations on what this is going to mean for the next several years? Because there's obviously the financial aspect as well, right? Somebody's leaving a job and kind of bootstrapping. Somebody's leaving a big role from Google and now moving from $500,000 a year to $100,000 a year stipend, if you will. Like there's compromises that are financial, but there's more mind and soul compromises because you're just not going to be as present for your family, no matter what you say. That's one. The second piece is your biggest asset as a company that is ready in that term sheet are the people, are the employees you bring in. I have seen far too many times, and the first red flag for me typically for any startup is when somebody says, well, yeah, I have a bunch of contractors that I pay $2,000 a month to that are building my product. Like, look, I get it, right? If you don't have an option, you don't have an option, but that's not a product. To me, that's a demo and a prototype. You're trying to convince people to give you some money. You need a very strong foundation, and the foundation starts with people that you hire, and you're like your first 5 employees, whoever you think are important enough to bring in, will ultimately, alongside you, define accidentally or intentionally the culture of your company, the kind of next 50 people you're going to bring into the company and attract, and so on and so forth. So be really mindful of the first 5-10 people. For example, when I started Endor, like my commitment to myself was no more than 2 of the first 20 employees would be from the same company. Like I could have hired the first 20 people in 20 minutes out of my past companies. But the decision was I wanted diversity of ideas. I wanted diversity of experiences. I wanted differential thinking than what I already knew of. And so people and kind of what you do with the first 5-10 people, pretty instrumental. The third thing is I fundamentally, and this goes contrary to popular belief of like, go build a startup in stealth and, don't tell anybody ever what you're doing and have people sign 4-page NDAs to go have a conversation. I'm much more of a build in the open, build with customers or design partners or industry experts around you hearing your idea, because when you keep saying it 10 times a day, 50 times a week, you will iterate on your messaging much better. You will have clarity very early on your product capabilities and what's going to work, what's not going to work. I have seen far too many times super sharp teams build the most incredible products solving really hard problems. 2 years later, come out of stealth, and you just kind of try to build this bridge 2 ways. And then by the time you got here, it just didn't connect. Always making sure that you're starting from the connective tissue and kind of building backwards. And that's why I said it's contrary to common belief of like, it's cool to say I'm in stealth and sorry, I can't tell you I have to kill you if I told you what my idea was. Is like, well, you know what? If somebody can take an idea you share with them in 5 minutes over beer and build a better company than you, then shame on you. They out-executed you.
Yeah, it's about the execution. And I think the stealth thing is just non-optional. It's not an option anymore with AI. Things are moving so fast. You need to get out there. You need customers, whether it's PLG, whether it's you have actual design partners and customers. You just need that feedback loop. Listen to your customers and iterate. What's your biggest regret?
I think it's the biggest regret because like I get reminded by my wife, and this bothers her a lot, and so I wish I had done that, is that I did not take any break between ending my gig at Palo Alto Networks and starting Endor. Right back to like, hey, the family bears the brunt of what you're going to get involved in. Look, my twins were 1 when I started Endor Labs. And so I think I call it the family regret is like, hey, I wish you had taken 6-12 months of just time with the family before you went off. And, look, my excuse then was, I have the idea and the markets don't wait for me. I've got to go do it now.
I get it. And I understand you're a family man, but you're also an entrepreneur and you're trying to balance the two. It's challenging. Outside of that, In terms of the biggest challenge, right? So outside of the biggest regret, the lessons, when it comes to being a founder, what is the number one biggest challenge that every founder faces building a company?
You don't have enough hours in the day to do everything you would want to do or want to do yourself or be personally involved in. So how do you scale? And how do you find time for the big picture? Because your day can get sucked into meetings back to back, morning to night. You're in firefighting mode, as I always call it, right? Like blocking, tackling. You're the only person that can define that big picture for your team. And so you get too involved in too many details because guess what? There's not enough people in the company always to do stuff you need to get done. How do you compartmentalize that with the think time, the big picture time, the zooming out time, compartmentalization of what are the 100x tasks versus your run the business as CEO, the normal tasks of your business, and how do you kind of compartmentalize time adequately for those two?
Do you find that you can find that time, whether it's, I know Saturday for you is family time, but do you have that you time where you can just stay away from everyone and just, whether it's deep work, whether it's thinking, whether it's reading a book or listening to music?
For me, usually that's late nights after everybody in the family's gone to bed. Last person's gone to bed. Then it's like my hour and a half at night to think through that. It's a weird thing to say, and I don't know how to explain, but like that subconscious time in the morning when you're still sleeping but not in deep sleep is usually a time where the thoughts of like the creative ideas come to me, right? At that 5:30 to 6:30, 7 o'clock slot, where you're kind of in bed, kind of sleeping, but ironically, that's when a lot of my creative ideas come. And I make sure as soon as I wake up, I'm either sending quick Slack messages to people or taking notes. My team probably is like, what side of the bed did you wake up on today? But that's usually where at least the ideas come. And then because they're in that subconscious period of time, I try not to lose them. And so I will try to jot them down before my day starts. Besides that, obviously, you've got your days, you're still working weekends, you're still working nights, you got the usual stuff. Driving time for me is a good time. I used to be it's funny, I've evolved from, and I feel like I'm just getting old too fast. I've evolved from blasting music in the car and driving to now silence in the car when I'm driving, because that's another time when I just think through my day and what I've just spent time on and what are some of the problems ahead that I need to solve for.
I'm very similar to you. I used to love listening to music on the way to work, and then it kind of moved to listening to podcasts or audiobooks, and then eventually that's the only time where it's silent, whether it's 10 minutes or 5 minutes. It's just the only time it's you and yourself, and you can think about things. What are the biggest challenges you're facing right now in the market? I mean, there's a lot going on. AI is exciting, but a lot's happening, whether it's, I guess, not just for yourself, but what are the challenges we're facing as a collective, founders and people in this world of Silicon Valley?
Look, I think every CEO is wondering what the existential threat to the business is with AI, and like, what am I missing out on, or what am I going to not properly gauge in terms of speed at which it'll come at me, whether it's competition and new architecture, it's complete paradigm shifts. For example, existential threat for my business would be if every human and every agent on the planet could just write secure code by default without needing anything else. Why do you need my product, right? And so now there's a lot of questions of, can that realistically ever happen? Would there still be the role of the security team doing kind of trust but verification? If it was, what would be the form factor verification? So I think that's kind of one class of problem. The other is a very cybersecurity focused problem, which has existed but continues to reinforce more and more, is cybersecurity is a crowded market. There is a lot of Me Too products people are trying to build. And essentially what happens is you have a unique product, you have a differentiated product, you can back that claim with data, but it doesn't matter because within 60 to 90 days, anytime Endor brings up any product launch, doesn't matter what it is, our competitors are literally copying like for like the messaging and the positioning of what we're doing. This is kind of what commonly we refer to as snake oil in the industry, or just kind of marketing tactics. Is like, you don't have it, but now what it means is I have to do extra things along the way to build that trust to say, well, I can truly do it. They're faking it. And the way we do that is, we have incredible customers. I gave you some reference examples, and, we share their stories, and we just make sure that people get their hands on our product and can try it for themselves, because seeing is believing. And usually I've heard this all too many times, which is, we tried Endor, we tried your competitors. Within 24 hours, we had thrown your competitors out of consideration because they claimed a bunch of stuff that was just, not true. And so, I think, how do you break out of the noise? How do you kind of not fall to the trap of doing that and really build a brand that is on trust? And one of the core parts of the things we spend a lot of time on is how do we have a very authentic tone? How do we sell with content that is meaningful and valuable to people versus a better, bunch of marketing class acts that aren't resonating with buyers that truly want to self-evaluate, self-educate, and essentially decide who is their best partner.
We speak to a lot of people in our network who are engineers, founders, investors, and C-levels. Who's your typical ICP?
So traditionally, the problem we solved has been owned by product and application security teams that typically report to the chief security officer. And I say traditionally because as software development and platform engineering is kind of taking a more relevant stake and a bigger stake in most companies that are engineering centric, we're starting to see that security function get closer and closer to platform engineering and DevOps. Whether that closeness means budget transfer, headcount transfer, remains to be seen. Doesn't happen all that often yet. But I do expect platform engineering teams to play a more and more meaningful role, because if essentially I can build the paved roads for the cars to seamlessly drive on, then I'm not worried about the potholes and the other things that will be the security incidents that will affect me. So if I'm building paved roads and security capabilities and tooling can become integrated into my IDE, integrated into my GitHub, integrated into those workflows, that's the ideal outcome versus security being a bolt-on afterthought. So yeah, I would say product security teams, application security teams, and certainly platform engineering teams are growing.
Varun, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. A very insightful conversation into different areas such as M&A, which is a topic when you and I had our prep call and you mentioned it, I was quite excited to tap into that. So thank you for being on the show today. I want to wrap up by asking you one final question, and it's how we wrap up every single episode on Inside the Silicon Mind. And it's called Inside Silicon Mind. The idea is to get into the minds of the people in our world, Silicon Valley. And one of those ways is books. I can see a few books there behind you. What book would you recommend to our listeners?
Look, since this is a Silicon Valley focused podcast, and Inside the Silicon Mind, there's no better mind than Ben Horowitz and kind of the hard thing about hard things. A lot of things we talked about is just the thing is startup building being hard, the compromises you make. I think that's a fantastic book for those that haven't already read it.
Great book. And it is really a great book. I've read it, and we'll put it in the footnote. Really appreciate it, Varun. It's been a pleasure having you on, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thanks for us. It was wonderful chatting with you.
Thank you, Varun.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. This podcast is powered by Harrison Clark. For more episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind.